everyone. You're listening to CaMMVets Media on WVOX AM 1460 and heard around the world on WVOX.com. This is Jack McGregor along with Ken Crazer bringing you this half-hour discussion of issues related to veterans and the active military. Now, here's Ken.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone listening to CaMMVets Media. We cover cadets, midshipmen, the military, and veterans proudly since 2008, and our show here, WVOX, since 2008. And I'm just back from the U.S. Military Academy. I had the privilege of sitting in their Board of Visitors meeting this morning, which is the oversight board at the Academy, includes several members of Congress. Steve Womack is the chairman, is a congressman from Arkansas, and Joni Ernst, a senator, was there, a couple of others. And they gave us a rundown on really what's happening at West Point and the damage to West Point from the storm 2 weeks ago, which they defined as $111 million to roadways, buildings, and to the residential houses. You know, they have 800 residential houses at West Point, I learned today. And about 130 of them were damaged, 20 of them seriously. And not to mention the belongings that everybody stores in their basements, right? Like I do. And so they have a problem that Steve Womack went through with the board meeting, is getting the $100 million appropriated. Because West Point wants to put the work they need, basically rebuilding a bridge and some other projects, out on September 15th. And they're not sure they can get the money appropriated before that. Because the end of the fiscal year for the Department of Defense is the end of September, and then the new fiscal year, they're not sure what's going to happen, if they're going to get a budget approved, or they're going to have a continuing resolution, which is a nightmare for everybody in the military. And then the continuing, the debt ceiling bill is, if it goes into effect, would mandate a 1% decrease in the budget. And so for the Department of Defense, which is looking for an $880 billion budget, that's about $10 billion that would be lost out of the budget. So it's hard to come up with an extra, because it's not like insurance. They don't have insurance for the federal government. It's sort of self-insured, as we say in the insurance business. You know, and they're not eligible for FEMA money because they're a military base. They're under the jurisdiction of the federal government. So FEMA can help everybody in Highland Falls and who lives outside. So we'll see. I'm going to have more in the second half of the show. And Jack, I know you got a lot of reports for us.
Yeah, I'll start off with what's happening in Ukraine. A Ukrainian drone strike over the weekend caused a massive explosion at an ammunition depot in Crimea, Russian-annexed Crimea, forcing evacuation of nearby homes. And the latest attack since Moscow canceled a landmark grain deal amid Kyiv's grinding efforts to retake its occupied territories. Now, the Ukrainian military took credit for the strike, saying it destroyed an oil depot and Russian military warehouses in Crimea. It sounds like it was a drone strike. The strike came during a week in which Ukraine attacked the Kerch Bridge in Russia, and it was described as retribution for a bridge attack, bombarded southern Ukrainian port cities and damaging critical infrastructure, including grain and oil terminals. Now, the Kerch Bridge is a conspicuous symbol of Moscow's claim in Crimea and an essential land link to the peninsula. It's a $3.6 billion, nearly 12-mile bridge, longest in Europe, and it's crucial for Russia's military operations in southern Ukraine. So that's a big attack there by the Ukrainians.
Yeah, that makes a big difference. You look at the maps, and it connects Crimea to a larger section of Russia. And it's the way Russia is able to get ammunition, reinforcements, troops, and supplies into Crimea, and opens that area up for possible for the Ukraine military to start the counteroffensive there. But this war is just getting worse and worse, because Russians already have finally figured out how to fight. And it's not on the ground, it's by firing missiles and bombs at the Ukrainians and trying to wear out the will of the Ukrainian people. But, we're just seeing that more and more.
Indeed. And the Pentagon announced a new $1.3 billion package of long-term military aid to Ukraine last week, including 4 air defense systems and an undisclosed number of drones. Now, included in that aid, which will be provided under the Ukrainian Security Assistance Initiative will be funding for 4 National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems, or NASAMS, and munition for them, as well as Phoenix Ghost and Switchblade drones. Unlike the Presidential Drawdown Authority, the Pentagon has used repeatedly over the past 17 months to pull weapons from its own stocks and quickly ship them to Ukraine. The USAI-funded equipment could take a year or two to get to the battlefront. As a result, the new package will do little to help Ukraine in its current offensive, but will help in future defense of the country. Now, the aid package includes funding for artillery, mining, clearing equipment, a variety of missiles and munitions, trucks and other vehicles, port security equipment, systems to counter drones as well. And so far, overall, the U.S. has provided more than $40 billion in military aid to Ukraine since the Russian invasion in February of 2022.
Well, that is, about 5% of the defense budget. But the thing that you see is how NATO is unified now.
Mm-hmm.
And the United States is leading NATO. And that's a big deal. The United States is leading basically the free world, because it's not just in Europe, but it's happening in the Pacific with the deal with the UK and Australia on the submarine deal. So we're seeing U.S. leadership out of this tragic circumstance. And we'll see. It's what happens over the next few weeks on this counteroffensive, or just may drag out. Someone said Russia's big strategy is just wait this thing out until the 2024 election and hope someone other than President Biden's elected.
Yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on that. Now, last week I mentioned a story about the U.S. sending more F-35 and F-16 fighters to the Middle East to deal with stuff there. Now the U.S. is sending additional warships and thousands of Marines to the Middle East to increase security in the wake of the Iranian attempts to seize commercial ships there. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said last Thursday he approved the deployment of the USS Bataan Amphibious Readiness Group and the 26th Marine Expeditional Unit to the Gulf region. According to U.S. officials, the Readiness Group consists of 3 ships, including the Bataan, an amphibious assault ship, and the unit usually consists of about 2,500 Marines. And along with the Bataan, the group includes 2 other warships, the USS Mesa Verde and the USS Carter Hall. The group left Norfolk, Virginia early this month. It was unclear Thursday if all 3 ships would continue into the Gulf region, but the deployment comes on the heels of the decision in recent weeks to send the USS Thomas Hudner, a destroyer, and a number of F-35 and F-16 fighter jets. I mentioned that Iran tried to seize 2 oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, but the U.S. naval ship intervened in that and stopped them. But now more ships are heading that way, and Marines as well.
Well, the Bataan we've seen at New York City Fleet Week. It's an amphibious assault ship. Really looks like a World War II Essex-class carrier. But the big question, it would be interesting to find out, is what kind of airplanes they're taking out on deployment, because normally an amphibious assault ship like that will take out about 25 vertical takeoff planes and helicopters that can support marine landings. But these amphibious assault ships are being reconfigured so they can handle the F-35s, which we've talked a lot about, the vertical takeoff version of the plane, so that it can take off down the flight deck and then land. The problem is those ships need to have their flight deck reinforced so that when they land it can still be accommodated because of the heat of the exhaust.
You're listening to CaMMVets Media on WVOX AM 1460 and heard around the world on WVOX.com. We'll be right back after this AP news break, so stay tuned.
In the north end of New Rochelle, you'll find an absolutely top-notch printer, one of the very best in the entire county. Minuteman Press is known for its fine work far beyond the South Shore area. In fact, this particular Minuteman Press is certainly the class of the fleet when it comes to full-service community printing. Located just off North Avenue in New Rochelle, in the narrow Wackagill walkway across the parking lot from Acme. Minuteman Press is a terrific resource for individual and small to medium-sized companies want something very special when it comes to printing. No matter how big or how small your needs, you'll get the skill and craftsmanship Minuteman is known for at very reasonable prices. From business cards to brochures, color copies, high-speed printing, individual booklets and flyers, it's Minuteman Press. Down that walkway when you're headed to Acme, offering quality printing at very good prices. Call Minuteman Press in New Rochelle, 914-576-0335. 914-576-0335.
Westchester's favorite morning show.
I love the morning show.
Good Morning Westchester with Dennis and Tony. Weekday mornings from 6 to 9. Right here on 1460 WVOX.
1460 WVOX.
Welcome back to CaMMVets Media on WVOX AM 1460 and heard around the world on WVOX.com. Now, over the weekend, we lost a pretty well-known veteran of World War II, Anthony Dominic Benedetto, better known by his name, Tony Bennett, sadly passing away at the age of 96, legendary jazz singer and crooner. But he was a veteran of World War II. He was drafted into the U.S. Army at the age of 18 in 1944, completed basic training at Fort Dix in New Jersey, and began service a year later. Was sent to fight on the front lines following heavy casualties suffered by Allied forces at the Battle of the Bulge. He was part of replacement troops that were sent to refill the ranks of units who perished during the Battle of the Bulge. And in March 1945, Bennett and his company pushed into Germany, where they began taking back German towns from the Nazi armed forces, house to house. The singer and about 1,000 other troops were taken off the front lines to watch Bob Hope perform at the USO show, but Bennett's final mission with his troops, they were sent to liberate a concentration camp south of Dachau concentration camp in Germany. And his unit had actually fight to take over this concentration camp. Most of the concentration camps that were liberated, the Germans had already abandoned and killed as many of the people as they possibly could, and just abandoned the camps. But with this one in particular, they had to. There were still some Nazi troops there, and Bennett and his those troops had to fight their way into liberating these camps, and they did. And they were able to. They brought food and water to the prisoners who were at this concentration camp. But legendary jazz singer and great World War II veteran. Here
What a great
Tony
story
Bennett.
about Tony Bennett that you brought up, Jack, and the detail that you have there, and how difficult that fight was at the end of World War II, going into Nazi Germany and liberating these POW camps and concentration camps. My uncle Warren Kreitzer was in about the same position, and the story he told was about when they were able to liberate I think it was a Polish POW camp, and the prisoners there were so pleased that they made an American flag out of the scrap cloth that they had. And what you find with World War II veterans, they'll talk about something nice that happened to them, and then we'll talk about the bad days. But think of how Tony Bennett made people happy for his whole career, because he saw how horrible that situation was in Germany at the end of World War II. And thank you for your service, Tony Bennett, and really making people happy. Reminds me of Charles Schultz. He served in Italy in World War II in 1944, went through the winter. My dad was in the same campaign, and he came back and he made people happy through his comic strip and then the TV shows. Same kind of thing. So our best wishes to Tony Bennett's family.
Interesting story out of North Korea. North Korea fired several cruise missiles towards its western sea over the weekend. Adding to the barrage of missiles in recent months, North Korea remained publicly silent on the fifth day of the fate of an American soldier who bolted into North Korea and crossed the heavily armed Korean border this week. Now, the missiles, North Korea on Wednesday fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles from an area near its capital, Pyongyang. The missiles flew about 340 miles before landing in waters of the east of the Korean peninsula. And as I mentioned, the American soldier Private Travis King sprinted across the border into North Korea while on tour of an inter-Korean truce village. North Korea's state media has yet to comment on King, and the country has not responded to U.S. requests to clarify where he's being kept and what his condition is. U.S. officials have expressed concern about King's well-being, considering North Korea's previous rough treatment of some American detainees. Some experts say North may be trying to use King for propaganda or as a bargaining chip to coax political and security concessions from Washington. But definitely have to keep an eye on that story.
I don't think the United States is going to give up much to get this this individual back. We'll see. It's a very strange story. But what's more concerning is North Korea launching more missiles. One day they're going to hit South Korea with one of those missiles, or Japan. They're flying at, what did you say, 340 miles high in an area where the distances between the countries aren't so big. And boy, I think China's eventually going to get tired of North Korea's being a world threat on its border. That is something that could erupt at any time, especially one of those missiles hits a occupied area of one of our allies, South Korea, Japan in particular, could be. So that's very, very volatile.
And speaking of China, China sent dozens of warplanes, including fighter jets and bombers, towards Taiwan. According to Taiwan's defense ministry, and this was over the weekend, marking a forcible display days before Taiwan had plans to hold military exercises aimed at defending itself against a possible invasion. Now, the Chinese sent 37 aircraft and 7 Navy vessels around Taiwan between 6 a.m. Friday and 6 a.m. Saturday. Among them were J-10 and J-16 fighters, H-6 bombers, and 22 of the detected warplanes crossed the midline of the Taiwan Strait, which is an unofficial boundary that had been considered a buffer between the island and the mainland, or entered Taiwan's air defense identification zone near its southern port, according to a statement. So the Chinese show a big Chinese show of force there around the island of Taiwan.
Yeah, they're going to do that. There have been increasing number of visits by high-ranking U.S. officials. Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, just visited. Anthony Blinken in this weekend at the Aspen International Summit talked about trying to keep dialogue with the Chinese and try to reaffirm the relationship and try to keep it based on competition and not becoming a full-fledged adversary.
Mm-hmm. And the U.S. Navy commissioned a new ship, the USS Canberra, which is a littoral combat ship. Leaders of the U.S. Navy joined their Australian counterparts. This was in Sydney Harbor. Rare occasion you have an American naval ship commissioned overseas, but this was in Sydney Harbor. Of course, the USS Canberra shares the name of the capital of Australia. The Canberra is the second Navy ship to bear the name of the capital city. The ship's namesake, the HMAS Canberra, sunk while fighting alongside U.S. forces during the Battle of Savo Island in World War II. As a result of the Canberra's actions during the battle, Marines of the 1st Marine Division were able to continue the fight on Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands. In recognition of the Canberra's sacrifice to protect U.S. forces, President Franklin Roosevelt ordered the under-construction cruiser USS Pittsburgh to be renamed the USS Canberra. The Secretary of the Navy, Carlos del Toro, was there and said, while the world is very different from the 1940s when the first U.S. Canberra was commissioned, Australia and the United States are once again facing significant challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. But the commissioning ceremony comes as the U.S. and Australia are formalizing deeper security ties and part of the AUK-U.S. technology sharing agreement. We talked about that before on the show. But a new littoral combat ship, the USS Canberra, joining the fleet.
Well, that's great. It's a great story. And again, it shows a partnership of the United States with Australia that we mentioned earlier. And it reflects a very important part of history when the U.S. named a World War II ship after the capital of Australia and fought in World War II in the victory of that conflict. And I just want to mention, I said I was up at West Point this morning. I sat in the Board of Visitors meeting, which is essentially their trustees. It's an oversight group that includes several members of Congress. Congressman Steve Womack is the chair. Senator Joni Ernst was there. The new congressman from Rockland County, who's West Point grad, was there. And so what it comes down to is West Point had $111 million worth of damage to its facilities, its buildings, roads, and houses. That was Congressman Representative Patrick Ryan, who we're going to try and get to join our show, Interact Better, and a West Point grad. And so they are starting to repair what they can. They have a detail of 400 staff to work on that. But to do the heavy construction, and they do have the Army Corps of Engineers working to identify what needs to be rebuilt and then how to rebuild it. Because you're going to remember, a lot of the roads there are on the side of a mountain built on embankments that are very old. So they want to send bids out on September 15th to get this work done. And their concern, and Congressman Womack expressed concern about getting the 110 million, whatever the number is going to be, through Congress, because it's the end of the fiscal year for the Defense Department. Their fiscal year ends the end of September, and they're not sure they get an appropriation there on this year's budget, or to go to into next year's budget. And next year's budget is very complicated unless it gets passed, because of the way the debt ceiling was approved, that there's a mandated reduction in the budget of 1%. I believe it's from 2022 levels for everybody's budget.
Mm-hmm.
So the Defense Department's budget will go down 1%, and that's about $9 billion, which is in the Navy, for the Navy, that's like one new submarine they can't buy.
Wow.
The same way, it's harder to put it in perspective for the Army, but it means there's going to be less personnel and less modernization. So that is what's happening. The big problem is the bridge is out that goes into West Point from Highland Falls. It's the Popolanian, I never knew the name of this, Gorge Bridge, Popoloean, and it's on 9W. If you go across the Bear Mountain Bridge, Bear Mountain is to the left, to the right is Highland Falls, and you make the right to go into, it's about 2 miles to the West Point gate from there. But you go over this bridge, and they've been working on it for the last couple of years anyway, but it is out. You cannot cross it, so you have to go north to Route 6, and you go all the way up past Camp Buckner to get to West Point, to what's called, you actually drive back down to the town and in, but I'm not sure, it's not sure how long these things are going to take to be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So some of them are, if that's a bridge has a structural defect or damage, it could be out for a year.
Wow.
I don't know. But so they weren't specific on these things.
That could be problematic for football season when you have a lot of people traveling up to West Point for football games.
Yeah, I mean, I talked with the athletic director, Mike Buddy, and we're going to talk more in detail, but he put out a statement that could affect, the storm could affect their ability to host sporting events. Now, the sports that really were affected were the rugby team, which has its field right next to the Hudson River on the north end of the post, and the whole field was covered with water, and some of the buildings. A lot of buildings that had water damage to the basements. That's like where the locker rooms are.
Wow.
The football team's locker room was flooded, but they repaired it. They put new carpeting down. They're ready to go. They start practice next week. Fortunately, they're putting down new field turf at Mikey Stadium, and it was fortunate they hadn't started putting the new turf down. They'd taken the old one out, and they were working on the subsurface, but they fortunately hadn't put the new turf down. So, that's $1 million out of a $100 million problem. We're listening to the superintendent, General Steve Gillen, and he was talking about that West Point is value and standard based, and that's how the Army is, and their motto is to live honorably, lead honorably, and demonstrate excellence all the time. Be positive, do your best, and be a good teammate was some of his words today.
We'll have to keep an eye on that situation at West Point. You've been listening to CaMMVets Media on WVOX 1460, heard around the world on WVOX.com. Remember to check out our Facebook pages, CaMMVets Media, our Sea Services page, Ariana Basketball Report page, and our West Point Football Report page. And until next week, remember to thank a veteran.